Welcome back again. We are now to season 2, episode 7 of Men the Mind. Unfortunately, we don't have Mike again. This is the second time this season. I don't know if he's skipping school. I don't know what's going on. Actually, tonight there was a family emergency, so he's dealing with that. Completely an excused absence, if you will, but we're looking forward to having him back on the next one, too. Today we're going to talk and we're going to try a little hook out. And so I'm going to introduce the topic before we introduce our guests. I think this is the first time we've done that. And today's topic is something that 71% of employers value more than technical skills when they evaluate candidates. It is something that 90% of the top workplace performers have high levels of. It is something that salespeople, people who are high in it, sell 50%, not times, more than their peers. And for every 1 point increase you have in this, it is linked to an average salary increase of $1,300 annually. 60% of leadership success is attributed to just this. It accounts for 58% of job performance. To put that in perspective, IQ accounts for 20%. And then 30% more stable relationships are seen in individuals high in this. Would one of you like to spoil this and say what it is that we're talking about?
Go for it, Regan.
Emotional intelligence.
There it is.
Sweet. And today we have Emmy, one of my coworkers here out in Tennessee. And then we also have Regan as a second-time guest over here, West Virginia, loud and proud tonight. And also former FSU alum, per usual. I want to start by tossing it out to you guys. What is emotional intelligence to you?
Emotional intelligence to me is not only being able to recognize what emotions you're feeling, but maybe why you're feeling them. And then also being able to self-regulate those emotions in a socially appropriate context.
I don't know that I could have defined that better myself. So yeah, I second what Emmy said, 100%.
Yeah, I would do the same thing. This is one that I've told you guys, not my strength, not my strong suit, not good at emotions, getting better, hopefully. But yeah, here to learn more than anything, hopefully along with any guests that are tuned in tonight. The textbook definition that I have in front of me that was courtesy of ChatGPT today is exactly what Emmy said. Not only to recognize what you're feeling and what emotions are there, but to understand, manage, and influence those, both for yourself and being able to recognize and understand. So there's levels of self-awareness, self-regulation, and those that are better at it are better at understanding what's going on in the room that they're in. Beyond that definition, why would you guys say it's important to have emotional intelligence?
What comes to my mind is, like Emmy pointed out, it's not just recognizing your emotions, but then also being able to regulate them. So, that goes so much into then, stress management. If you don't know what's going on with your emotions and how to manage those, then that can bleed over into stress and how to manage your stress. And as we know, stress management can be everything, especially in like a high, fast-paced environment. So, emotional intelligence, I would assume that would also kind of correlate with your ability to regulate yourself stress-wise as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Two things come to mind for me. And the first one is we know that emotions come from our thoughts, right? So if we are able to recognize the emotions that we're feeling in the moment, then we can have a better grasp on what types of thoughts that we're having, the types of beliefs that we have. And the second part is from a leadership standpoint, where if you are put in a position to help develop, to help other people thrive, then you have to be able to take their perspective. You have to be able to know what they're feeling, to read the room. And I think it's just really hard to be an effective leader if you're unable to understand why people are feeling the way that they are.
Yeah, I don't think I could do either of those better as well. I've heard in a couple of books that it's like IQ gets you in the door and EQ is a better predictor of once you're in the door, are you getting promoted? Are you moving up? Are you developing in the company? And so that leadership piece is definitely there. I like the stress as well from Regan. And I want to flip and expand on that a little bit and say, so it sounds like you're in a good spot when you have high emotional intelligence. What does it look like when that is low?
I think I kind of think of, sort of like the tolerance and like threshold piece of it too. So, if like my tolerance for stress is here, I don't have emotional intelligence. I can't regulate myself. So if, I have a stressful day at work and I'm here and then I get home and my partner does one thing that annoys me. Now I'm over my stress. Now I've exploded on them, and it's like small things become big things. This creates kind of blow ups, and it creates extra stress and extra tension that maybe wouldn't have been there if you were able to pause, check in with yourself, recognize your emotions, and then regulate those a little bit better.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I heard a piece from a TED Talk recently that was kind of related, but talking about parenting with this idea of kid comes to you and, they want something. Mom, dad, can I have this? Kids aren't dumb. They're coming to you at a certain time, right? And based on your habits, you are likely to do, the one of two things, right? Which is give them what they want, and now they're excited because they've got what they want, or no. And if they don't like the answer no, they're going to keep pushing. How many times does the pushing eventually lead to an explosion that's like, all right, fine, have it. Take it. I don't care. Go do whatever you want. You want to play on the PlayStation? Go play on the PlayStation. Don't care. Or, as Regan said, someone else enters the room and you're already upset, right? And it's like, okay, significant other now comes in. Why is he on the PlayStation? What's he doing over there? Like, why does he have this? You're already upset. And you blow up again, and now there's conflict in that relationship. And that was one of the things that sparked in my head with that stems from not understanding the emotions that are coming to you and regulating in a proper way when that kid is initially asking, right? I was like, yeah, that's pretty relatable. I can see that happening. I've definitely deflected and projected things from situations along those lines. Emmy, what does it look like to you, if any different, with emotional intelligence being on the low side?
For me, my experience, I think, is honestly quite different. Both my parents and both my brothers have, it's not called Asperger's anymore, but they have Asperger's. And so their emotional intelligence is completely different, where they don't recognize emotions in other people. A lot of the time, it's hard for them to read facial expressions. But the weirdest thing is that they can read the vibe of a room. So if they come into a room and I'm really tense, they're like, hey, like, what's wrong? But if I'm showing the emotion like on my face, they have no idea what emotion I'm showing. My mom will text me new emojis and be like, hey, like, what is this trying to convey? Because I have no idea. And I've also interacted with people who are neurotypical, where you just walk into a room and like they either don't care, they don't care what's going on because they want to impose like their point of view, their standards, their conversation, whatever it is. So either don't know or they don't care, and they effectively steamroll people with their agenda.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very unique perspective as well. Mm-hmm. I like that you brought in reading the sense of the room, right? We may normally get our read on how someone's doing from their face, but that's not the only way. And so using the different cues, things that you can pick up on to understand where people are at, right? That key piece with the emotional intelligence. I want to go from there to this idea of once you have the understanding that something is going on, is there a difference between being an emotional person and being an emotionally intelligent person?
For sure. Yeah.
Tell me more.
I mean, I think I would say like being an emotional person would be someone who feels a lot, like this kind of in layman's terms, you feel things and you feel them passionately. That doesn't mean that you know what you're feeling though. Like if I'm feeling something, like if I'm angry or I'm upset, I'm sad, I'm whatever it is, or I'm tired, that could all manifest itself the same. But if I don't have the emotional intelligence to reflect and check in with myself and actually figure out what the root of that manifestation is, then that looks very differently, because I may or may not be actually addressing the root of the problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. Emmy, you had something as well? She's here.
I lost Emmy.
Yeah, we may have had a little lag, but that's okay. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that that's an important distinction to make, and that's one that I have definitely fallen victim to, is this understanding that they are the same thing, and that's not the case at all. I also think there's the flip side of what you said, feeling things super, super strongly, which is not feeling things at all.
Yeah.
And that's where we get to an interesting caveat that bridges us to our next topic. So, this idea of I don't feel that emotions are super strong. They aren't something that I am commonly identifying. It's not a strength of mine to understand my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I make most of my decisions off of logic or something along those lines, is what you'll usually hear. I would subscribe to that. That doesn't necessarily exist separately from emotional intelligence, though, does it?
It's a good one. It's separate. I don't think it's separate because you do still feel emotions to a degree. You feel joy, you feel sadness, you feel anger, you feel envy, you feel these things. For you to recognize those things, and that's still like a part of your decision making, even if it's a smaller part than the logics part. It's there somewhere, because emotions are like motivators, right? I remember in our Svenja class, our emotion and emotion regulation class, we talked so much about how our emotions drive us to do things. If I'm feeling sad and whatever, I long for people who bring me comfort. If I'm feeling happy, that motivates me to like get up and dance, like it motivates our behaviors. And so I don't feel like those are separate things necessarily.
So I did not pick up the last bit of that, Regan.
Okay.
It was lagging on my end, but if you could recap that real quick.
Where should I continue?
Kind of when you were listening, you're still feeling things like, you might still feel envy.
Got you.
Things along those lines.
Yeah. So we were kind of addressing like people who don't feel emotion super strongly, is that separate, from emotional intelligence and their decision making. So I was just kind of saying, like, you still feel emotion to a degree. It may just be, less than some other people, and you still are motivated by your emotions, right? Like, our emotions drive us to do certain things. So if I'm feeling sad, I may, long to be with someone who brings me comfort. If I'm feeling happy, I may get up and dance. Like, our emotions still motivate us and drive our behaviors. And so I don't think that being like someone who doesn't necessarily feel emotions as strongly is separate from being like low emotional intelligence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And from my understanding, again, this is not my strength, but emotional like availability kind of enters this equation for me. That's one that I've definitely had experience with. Maybe I'm not fully invested. Maybe I want to be fully invested, but I don't feel emotions, and I defer that to logic. But running with what we just said, emotional intelligence and logic can exist together. And so a lack of emotion doesn't push that off. I think that's actually where you run into people saying, just suck it up. Or people thinking I'm not supposed to feel this way growing up, right? And that's almost too much logic, not enough emotional intelligence, somewhere in that spectrum, which is a problem. I think that's a very big thing. That's kind of the spark of the whole "you're valid in what you feel" movement that we've had recently. That's been a really big phrase. Emmy, any thoughts on this, if you're caught up?
Yeah, I think so. Sorry. Yeah. I'm on Kai's computer and it just shut down. And I was like, oh, okay.
That's an Apple for you, right?
Yeah. This is why you use not Apple. Sorry, I'm ready. Go ahead, Nick.
I guess just broad end for you. What are your thoughts on the ideas of being emotional doesn't necessarily equal emotional intelligence? How does logic fit in for you?
That's a really good question. I think, to me, logic is a lot of the self-regulation piece. So being able to like recognize the emotions that you're feeling in the moment, and then being able to use logic to understand why you're feeling that way, and also logic to understand the context that you're in as well. For example, if for an example that happened last week, I think I was teaching to Nick and several of my coworkers, and I was unbelievably frustrated. And it was showing, and I was doing my best to regulate. And Nick asked me, he was like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm not good, Nick. I'm not good." And I blew up, and I was like, at the end of the day, I was so upset because I was like, I failed to self-regulate. I failed to understand why I was feeling the way that I was, and then being able to move forward in a way that was socially acceptable. I was just overtaken by my emotions. So the logic comes into play of, yes, I'm feeling this way. What can I do to help me, like to help put myself in a better position to do the task at hand, which for me at that moment was teaching.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love two things in particular about that. One, you slowed down. It's not like it was an instantaneous process. You're not going to get it right away. Nobody's going to get it right away. Nobody's going to be perfect at it. And for anybody listening, Emmy's much better at this than most people. But sometimes you need to take a moment and collect, right? So I like highlighting that. I think that that's really important. And when we talk about building emotional intelligence, giving yourself the grace in that matter is important. The other thing is you highlighted, just like Regan highlighted, they can coexist, right? Emotional intelligence is actually kind of logical. And so the idea that being emotional, maybe, or logical, the classic like male female stereotypes, if you will, is emotional intelligence might not be the highest when emotions are out of control. And maybe that's where we start to pick apart the it's not, you're not thinking logically, and somebody comes in and then you blow up, right? And so I guess let's dive in with that a little bit more, with the idea of blowing up. How do you go about regulating in those moments?
I think, I mean, you blow up because you don't self-regulate in the moments leading up to that. You don't process the emotion in the moment. You don't take the time to check in with yourself or recognize what you're feeling. And doing that consistently over time, especially when you are run down or depleted or in like a high stress environment, then it's a lot easier to just push all that to the side. I'll worry about it later. And at some point, you can't take it anymore. And so me personally, I find the best way to self-regulate in those moments is to steer into the blow up a little bit. Like, just let it happen. Have a little bit of release, whatever that looks like. If it's raising your voice or if it's crying a little bit, whatever it looks like for you, is allowing yourself a little, just like when you shake up a pop can, right? Just release a little bit of the air inside so that you slow down.
I think I like that part about just like kind of checking in with yourself. Like I kind of think about, often in my job, like I'm jumping from meeting to meeting. I'm meeting with Division I athletes and coaches all day. Sometimes coaches are pissed about different things, and then athletes come in and they dump their stress on me, and then I got to go into the next meeting and, divulge sensitive academic information and all these things. So I'm kind of bouncing around to different stressful meetings all day. And something that I feel like I've noticed helps me is just like looking inward, sort of, even for like a second in between each meeting, and allowing myself to say, like, I'm feeling stressed right now, but that's okay. I'm going to get through this next meeting. Like, it doesn't have to be pretending that I'm not stressed. Like, I can go, okay, this has been a busy day. This is a lot going on. I've still got 10 more meetings throughout the rest of the day, but like, I'm acknowledging that. And even just the second of acknowledging that, okay, I am a little stressed, relieves me of some of that. So I think that has been huge in days that I have just crazy all day meetings, is just allowing myself to feel what I feel. And then I kind of instantly feel at least a little bit of relief.
Regan, would you say that you are an empathetic person? Yeah. I resonate. But also the reason I ask is because in the job I had before this one, I was just meeting with clients all day, whether it was soldiers, it was family members, and they were coming to me and they're like, I have this problem, please help me. And I'm like, okay, I'll do my best. But I completely resonate with just going from one meeting to the next, to the next, to the next. I think that there's a dark side of empathy there, because you are empathetic and you truly care about what other people are going through. So you're taking on some of their stress, some of their negative emotions, whatever it is. Right. And then if you don't check in with yourself, it's like you're carrying that to the next person. You're carrying that to the next person. And before you know it, at the end of the day, you're tense, you're stressed, and maybe it's because you were so empathetic throughout your day, and really steering into that empathy, you put other people's emotions before yourself of, okay, I don't have time to check in with myself. I have to go to the next person. I have to get to the next thing.
No, that's a great point. And I think potentially for some people, and even, myself sometimes, if I don't do as good of a job of checking in with myself, what that could manifest as is kind of our example earlier of I go through that whole day, I'm stressed. And then if I blow up at, a partner for something small, I've now made it about them when there was this whole build up, this whole thing all day that added to my stress. It had nothing to do with my partner. That was a me thing, So if I don't check in with myself, then I make it other people's problem.
I also find myself in that situation a lot. And me and my husband have talked about it. And part of it is he is my safe space. Like, I feel like I can be completely myself around him. And a lot of times, unfortunately, I fail to self-regulate around him because I know that I can just feel free to let it all go. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, like, it's not fair to him. It's not fair that I release all of this pent up emotion and stress and tension towards him just because I know that I can. And that's something that I'm always trying to work on, is not putting that on him.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal, relatable piece. There's also the idea of it over time. And so maybe it's not a single day, but maybe over time what happens. This brings me to something that's near and dear to Mama Davis, which is addiction and substance abuse therapy. So the picture that I've heard from her and from other sources is a lot of times when you have someone who is a really big giver, right? This empathic person, like your guys are talking about, who just wants to help, just wants to help, just wants to help. And maybe even growing up in the household, like help, 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 help. First one, if there's screaming and crying going on in the other room, like what can I do to assist you, right? Sometimes the story goes something like they go on to a secondary school and they fall in with the wrong crowd, and that takes it wherever it takes it. Maybe that's a substance piece, maybe that's something where it's an abusive relationship, something along those lines, but something that clearly the family, the parents are like, I don't know what happened, like it must have been the environment and who she was around. The craziest question I've heard is one that's like, okay, well, what about that felt like home to her, that she was attracted to it? The proposal that I have, and you can tell me absolutely not, you're making a reach here, but the proposal that I had and what was said in this same little video was that the failure to properly regulate the emotions and consistent giving created something where normal was giving to someone. And so you need someone that takes to feel like home. And that thus is the bad crowd, but it's the same thing. It's just a different group, maybe a different context. And that kind of sets up for longer term impacts from a failure of properly learning how to, regulate your emotions.
I mean, it makes sense to me.
You bought in.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
No, I was just going to say, so what if they don't end up in the wrong crowd? So does that same person surrounded by people who make better choices not fall into addiction?
That's a phenomenal question, because I don't think it's a linear, like, you're going to be addicted because you're a giver. Like, that's a terrible, we're not saying that. But my head goes to like type A, to be honest. If parents instill structures and stuff along those lines, is that what you seek for in a work environment? Is that something that you seek in relationships? Maybe it's not, necessarily an addiction, but that same sort of behavior where you're looking to strive for perfection or to give, whether that's to others or to yourself, to your work, to your family. I wonder if that has any plausibility.
Nurture versus nurture a little bit, like just kind of who you are, but then also a little bit about your environment that also determines what happens to you.
Yeah. And I think obviously it's out of our controls what environment we're born into, but it is always remarkable how much it shapes us growing up, what we learn, what we had modeled, what we didn't have modeled.
Mm-hmm.
For me, there's no male role model that I grew up that knew emotions. So shocker, I don't really know how emotions work. I couldn't identify them. A lot of times when we have class that's focused around emotion, I have to go around with an emotion wheel, and I can't fully define half of them. Like, well, it's kind of like the parent group it's in, but that's the issue in its application. I will say this might be a good point for the listeners, but some self-reflection questions that I found to say if you're high or low on emotional intelligence, that ability to understand and regulate your emotions. So the first set is consider the relationships you have with your coworkers and ask yourself, are your conversations strained? Do you repeatedly blame others when projects don't go as planned? And are you prone to outbursts? And underneath it, take a moment, reflect if you're listening, but these are all signs of a lack of emotional intelligence. And so some failure to regulate, to understand wherever that lapse may be. And then some other ones that I saw were, how do you typically react to stress or conflict? How well do you understand your name and emotion, or understand and name your emotions? So for me, I can't name what I'm feeling. It's like good, joy, happy. That's what I got. It doesn't go much deeper than that. Like you guys talked about, are you empathetic and responsive to others' emotions? And how often do you feel in control of your emotions rather than overwhelmed by them? And so to the degree that you're doing well on all these questions, you might have a general sense of EQ. Obviously, there's a bunch of tests out there. I think there's some free ones I saw on like Mind Tools, and then Institute for Health and Human Potential if you're curious, and then there's paid ones that are more specific. I think the interesting thing about these is they bring in the other side, like we touched on briefly, which is instead of having too much emotion and being overwhelmed by it, maybe you default to blame or a lack of emotion, and you're sitting in the room. This is me. Something just blew up. Someone's terribly upset. Maybe they had an outburst, and I'm sitting there like, what are they mad about? Like, what's the problem? How would you coach someone, me, through that to gain more intelligence if you don't know what you're looking for as far as like the emotion?
So something that I've done with my younger brother in particular is it's weird because he's very empathetic, but a lot of times he doesn't like understand the emotions that he's picking up on. He just knows that he's picking up on emotions. But when we've had fights, I've come to him and he's like, I don't understand why you're upset. Like, I don't get it. I tell him exactly how I'm feeling to the best that I can and why I'm feeling it. And then I ask him, do you see why I'm feeling this way? And if he says no, then that's an opportunity to go in a little bit deeper and have more of a conversation about it. And if he says yes, then we get to progress and move forward of like, okay, so you do understand how this upsets me. What can we do next time? Or what can both of us do better? How can I communicate better to you? And or how can you recognize the symptoms of when something isn't going right?
Yeah. I like that. To kind of go off of that, I feel like what came up for me in terms of just like advice for regulating emotions and stuff like that. I'm thinking of a particular student athlete that I work with right now who does just kind of constantly blame other people. And it's something that I've tried to work on with him is the idea that you're allowed to just be neutral to things too. Like it doesn't always have to be like, this thing happened, that is the worst thing that's ever happened, like that person sucks. Or like, like everything is always somebody else's fault. Like sometimes things just are, and that's okay. But also the idea that two things can be true at the same time. Like maybe your professor is a dick, but also you didn't do your homework assignment. So like it can be both things at the same time.
These are the tough ones because like her side is going to upload this and then it's just like, hey, Nat, can you edit this? Because, yeah, it'll still upload for her and she's back. But Could you jump back in again, Regan, from maybe my professor is being a dick?
The neutrality piece, but also the thing that, two things can be true at the same time. Like, your professor can suck and be mean or whatever, but also you could have not taken care of your own business and responsibilities. Like, I feel like sometimes people fall into this, like, everything is so black and white kind of thing. And this, it couldn't be me, so it's got to be everybody else. If you can kind of reel that in a little bit, that can help you kind of slowly progress toward, like, okay, first things are neutral. And then that can kind of help lend itself to, like, okay, maybe now I can kind of start looking internally a little bit more.
I just had an aha moment while you were talking on that. The idea of it can be this or this, right? I had a book phrase it as simplifying things is a good way, if it's this or that, to have people dig their heels in on the side they're already on. Take politics, for example. Polarization is going to make people further dig in what they already believe, right? But if you complexify it and do the opposite, make it a spectrum, give 4 or 5 different categories, people are more likely not only to see other sides, but be likely to change. I'm wondering now if this has an application in the spectrum of emotional intelligence, if you will. Are you less likely to maybe see eye to eye with somebody who's either like you're being emotional, you're being logical? And if so, what are those middle grounds that would make the conflict healthier, if you will?
Kind of to your point of, like, the wheel, right? It's hard for you to pick, like, it's this one or it's this one. Like, it can be many of them at the same time. Like, you're allowed to feel anger and sadness and envy and, whatever. Like, it can be multiple things sort of manifesting themselves together. And so I think if you're struggling to identify, like, you don't have to pick one, like, it can be many things at the same time, as opposed to, like, I am happy or I am sad or I am this or I am that. You know what I mean? Like, there's room for all of that.
I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. If you are many things at once, it can be really daunting because now, like, if you want to be introspective and figure out why you're feeling not only this one emotion, but why you're feeling these 6 emotions, there's just a lot more work to put in and a lot more to parse through and to reconcile within yourself, which, I mean, ultimately is, I think, what we have to do in order to build emotional intelligence, to build that self-awareness and self-regulation.
Yeah, that's fair. And you guys just highlighted something else that stuck out to me. And maybe this is the intermediate grounds, if you will. But the idea of not understanding any of your emotions or not, I guess be a different level, but not regulating, a failure of that, but the desire to want to or to not want to, right? There's a difference in, I would say, even emotional availability, although the outcome might be similar, but emotional availability not being present with someone who wishes it was, or someone who just, I don't have that, stop being emotional, like those are very different takes. And so step 1 might be wanting to understand emotions, and then step 2, maybe it's that I need to sit down with a wheel and try to understand it or have the conversations like Emmy was having with, it was your younger brother,
Yeah.
On what is that like, I need more information, I need more understanding. Maybe that's a route to carry forward, is if you can start to understand others, maybe that leads insight to your own.
I also think it's important to, like, dedicate a time and space for you to check in with yourself. Like, you can want to do that all you want, but at the end of the day, when you sit down and you're exhausted and all you want to do is scroll on social media or whatever it is, then you are just bombarding yourself with information instead of allowing yourself the time and space to be introspective.
Some decompression time at the end of the day. Like, especially, we could start the day about, like, the effects of going, to bed stressed and, like, having not sort of decompressed and introspecting, thinking about your emotions from the day and reflecting and what that does for like your physical health. Like I keeps the score again for like the 5th time like recently, and so it's just making me think about like our emotions, if we do not tackle them, if we do not think about them and reflect on them and like put some real work into understanding them and regulating them, it has serious consequences sometimes. So I definitely think that decompression before bed and then actually let yourself go to bed and rest is huge.
Have not read the book. I've been meaning to. It's like second on my list of books that I've been wanting to read. But if I'm not mistaken, the book talks about storing emotions in your body, like feeling emotions. So would you mind giving a brief overview about like the physical sensations of emotions and storing emotions in your body that the book talks about?
As you know, so it talks about trauma mostly, like someone who's experienced some significant trauma, and what that does to rewire just every part of your brain and your body, right? So they use the example of like a child who had been like locked in a cage as a child. Their body rewired themselves to, I am stuck here. There is nothing that I can do about anything that I am experiencing right now. And so even well into adulthood, after they were no longer in a cage, their brain and their body still felt like it was there because they were not able to process through all of the emotion, all of the hurt, all of the trauma that they experienced. So it does have a very, very profound effect on just all of our physiological symptoms when we are not addressing what's going on with our emotions.
Thank you. The reason I ask is I've seen not a lot of research, but when you take the time to understand what you're feeling, I've heard certain psychologists give the prompt of asking yourself, where am I feeling this emotion in my body?
Mm-hmm.
Like tracking it in your body, taking some time, and then just focusing on that physical sensation, no matter where it is in your body.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, is it like giving your body permission to be like, okay, let me know where this emotion is being stored.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's huge. And in my day of research, not only noticing where it is, right? And you guys have talked about acknowledging it, but accepting it on that too. The idea that what you're feeling is valid, giving yourself that benefit of the doubt. Because if you don't accept it, you just acknowledge it and then say, that's dumb, that's stupid. Then we're back to the point of, I shouldn't be feeling this, which is problematic. That's a problematic thought, right? I think that's a unique perspective. And I think you could probably journal it too if you're not having that conversation with another person, but creating that distance and giving yourself self-reflection on those feelings and on those thoughts that are going through your head might be beneficial as well, as far as practicing the skill. But, cool. I have one more curveball for you guys. This one I have not told either of you guys. Based on anything that we've talked about, I'm going to read like 2 or 3 findings that I found interesting today. One of which is that there's an equation that predicts whether a marriage stays together or does not stay together over 6 years. It's like 90% accurate, 80% accurate, something absurdly high. This is also from 2014. It's a little outdated. I don't know if that still holds, but at the time it did. But it took into account areas of conflict and your body language in conflict. And so if the topic is finances, if the topic is in-laws, how are you responding? What are you saying? What is your body doing? And what is your partner saying? What is your partner's body doing? And they found that the biggest predictor of successful relationships was couples that compromise couples that compromise the least and react the least to their partner in these moments of conflict last the longest in marriage. They also found that the biggest red flag was overestimating your partner's qualities, which you both know I am terribly guilty of. Any thoughts on these findings and how it connects to anything we've talked about today? Asking for a friend who is also named Nick.
Thoughts on that? I think similar, that kind of added another piece of like during conflict, watching sort of like check in with each other physically, emotionally, whatever. And I feel like it brings back to the idea that in a conflict, you want it to be you and your partner versus the problem, and not you and your partner versus each other. You can successfully have that mindset if you are so worried about like being right, which I think if you have actually checked in with yourself enough and if you have regulated your emotions enough, you wouldn't be doing that. You wouldn't be so defensive and so worried about being right. So if you have sort of regulated yourself enough to get to a place where you can comfortably tackle this situation with your partner, I think that's where emotional intelligence can be huge in a relationship and in conflict specifically.
I totally agree. And like we talked about earlier with like this concept of emotional flooding, where you're just being overwhelmed with emotions, you are, I would argue, unable to make any, or I wouldn't say any, but unable to make logical progress. So if you are fighting about something that has serious consequences, if you are allowing yourself, or you just happen to be in a position where you're so overwhelmed, then how are you supposed to tackle the problem when you can't even self-regulate yourself?
Both of those eye-opening aha moments. First, I'll touch on Emmy's because it's still ringing in my the auditory memory. But yeah, I get way too caught up in wanting to be right, particularly because both witnessed this. Most men probably are also here if we're continuing the stereotype from earlier. But how often do I want to be right in a sports debate, and how often are my emotions getting the best of me in that sports debate where it's no longer about anything other than being right, proving my point? That happens a lot in the office, I would say, and you might be able to back that up, particularly with fantasy football. But the other one was, Regan, your point about me and my partner versus the problem. I don't think I've ever thought of that in an emotional sense. Like, to me, like, that is logical and you attack the problem logically. Never in my life have I even inserted the idea that emotions play a role there. They obviously do. Wouldn't deny it, but it was the first time that that has dawned on me. So that's interesting and unique. Both of those give me a lot to think about. I mean, did you have something?
I was going to say, I love like it's me and my partner versus the problem. I think back to, I hate airports. Like they stress me out. Everything's too expensive. It's just, you never know what you're going to get in an airport. It stresses me out. And so when me and my husband travel, and I'm someone who like, I'll eat like a bowl of oatmeal on the way to the airport so I don't have to like pay for food. And my husband's like, I'll just get something there. And I'll get upset because I'm like, it's a waste of money. Like it's just, why are you paying $20 for like a chicken sandwich meal? And it's like in those moments where it's like, okay, why am I truly upset? Okay, I am upset because airports are unpredictable, and these large corporations, like, it gives them an opportunity to be greedy because people are stuck there and you have to eat food, right? And so instead of me being upset at my husband for paying, like, spending money, it's, at the end of the day, $20 is not a huge amount of money. It's okay, I am upset, like, it's airports are unpredictable, and now me and my husband can come together and agree on that and then move forward. So it's no longer me versus him. It's like, yeah, airports suck, early mornings suck, paying $20 for a chicken sandwich sucks, but we've got to eat. Let's move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Versus doubling down on the idea that the problem is that he's spending money, which is 100% what I would do. That's more insight. Good to know. You guys are running away with, I think all of these I'm just going to answer as my application because I need to work on this a lot. But to you two, kind of wrapping up here today, what's something that stood out from the conversation that you want to work on going forward? Let's say the next week or so, if there was something you could implement more in your life, what would it be? How would you do it?
I think for me, the point that Regan made about just going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and now you're just overloaded. Like for me, because I'm empathetic, is finding a way to take time throughout the day to, I don't want to say like not be empathetic because that sounds really bad, but like take some time to maybe turn down the empathy so that I can put my emotional needs in front of whatever's happening. Like, yes, I might have a meeting in 10 minutes. Can I take the time to take a little bit of a break, turn down the empathy, make sure I'm okay moving forward?
Kind of with that, you kind of pointed it out to me earlier, like you asking me the question, are you an empathetic person, would not even have crossed my mind when I was saying what I did. But I think that kind of made me think of the analogy of like, you can't pour from an empty cup. I feel like we always think of that in terms of like physical health. Like you need to rest and like recover like physically to be able to be at your best. But you kind of brought it to my awareness that like, it's also emotionally draining when you're doing that type of work all day. So I think what I will take away from that would be to just like remember that I need to sort of refill my cup and allow me to, kind of be the best person that I can be by giving myself a little bit of grace in the emotional realm a little bit sometimes too.
Yeah. And like, it's so hard when what you're doing is fulfilling, but at the same time, it's also really draining. Like helping other people is fulfilling. Like how can it be both?
Well, that's like when Regan was talking about it can be two things at once. Like there could be another scenario of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost all three of us. How do you balance the two at the same time, right? Physical exertion, the best recovery is focusing more mentally on a task and letting the physical rest. How do you do that emotionally and cognitively? Does it work the same? I don't know. All right. Well, we are wrapping up another really fun episode. I learned a lot, so I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. I thank both you guys for coming on. Anybody who's made it this far, as always, if you made it this far, I love what Mike said last episode, which was you deserve a treat, and that treat should be liking, commenting, or subscribing to the channel so that you can get more of this content. And so, honestly, we hope that you guys enjoyed it as much as we did. And I would love to encourage, as always, reflect on what you listened to, and if anything stuck out to you. Is there an area that you can improve on? How can you improve on it this week? And challenge yourself to do it. Those micro adjustments are what add up to the big picture change. It's not drastically changing your diet in one day. It's cutting out the bad and slowly inserting greens little by little, a reference that I thought Emmy would appreciate. So what change can you make in terms of emotional intelligence, and how can we get better? Thank you guys, and we will see you next time.